Good morning. How y'all doing? Obviously, a new setup here. Still trying to figure out my laptop situation, but we're going to do it on desktop today. So we did not do a post-game live for the previous game, largely because I had allergies. But here we are in a new setting, and I think it's a little bit late to be talking post-game, right? For the previous game, we can talk about the series. We can talk about some trends that are emerging, but one of the trends I think that is emerging is I think the Raptors are right. This whole Vision 6-9 thing that a lot of people have clowned, a lot of people think that Cucumber Liquor saying, hey yo, man, what's going on? A lot of people think that the Raptors conceded, that this whole trade for Jakob Pertl is an admission that Vision 6-9 doesn't work, that you got to have a center. But I want you to take a really close look at what's happening in the NBA Finals. To be honest, I think you see that the Raptors are right, that a lot of how the Heat are failing to be able to guard Nikola Jokic comes down to not having the right personnel. You take a look at playmaking bigs, right? Look at the trend that's emerging. Bam Adebayo, and you could also say Nikola Jokic, obviously, probably the prime example of a playmaking big in the NBA. And what are we really seeing? We're seeing guys who can pass, dribble, shoot the basketball, solid screeners, good defenders. Yeah, you might argue that maybe, okay, we can definitely argue that Jakob Pertl is no one's idea of a ideal scorer, but he has more in common with those two players than he does with a lot of other centers in Raptors history. And I think that the Raptors have correctly identified that in order to stop stars, you need length. You know, you look at this unstoppable thing that's emerging in the NBA Finals right now, which is the Jokic, Jamal Murray two-man game. No one seems to have had an answer for it. Granted, I do think that at some point we're going to have to accept that the Denver Nuggets have not exactly had the strongest opponents to this point, right? Let's be honest here. They've played 3 play-in teams. I'm not taking anything away from what the Denver Nuggets are trying to do, but I am saying that playoffs are largely matchup driven, and there probably was a team in this playoffs that could have given the Nuggets a lot more competitive a series than this current Miami Heat team. Granted, everything the Heat are doing is incredible. Everything Coach Spoelstra is doing is incredible. I'm not taking anything away from them. I am, however, saying they're a couple bodies short of being able to do anything to stop this. And at some point, it just comes down to physics. Really, that's what it comes down to. So consider the type of defenders the Raptors have and how they would play in this year's finals. Mason saying, "Hey Rob, what's good? What's good, man? How you doing?" Billy saying, "Good morning." I forgot to say this is an old trademark of this channel. Please grab your coffee. Make sure to hit subscribe and all that good stuff. You look at guys like Precious Achua. You know, this is one of the things that I always look at in the NBA Finals because ideally, not always, but ideally, the NBA Finals are an emblem, if not a marker of this is what's working right now, right? Golden State Warriors. This is what's working. And because league executives and this is a copycat league, you can bet your bottom dollar that how the Denver Nuggets perform in this finals, what the Miami Heat have done to this point, the teams that have failed, they're all going to become blueprints for what people are trying to emulate in the coming season. That's definitely going to happen. So you got to look at what's really working right now, what's not working, and what trends are emerging. When I think about stopping Jokic and Jamal Murray, right? Thinking Basketball had a great video on this, really talking about what you need and the type of actions you need to be able to slow this down. And all I kept thinking about was how would OG Anunoby tip the balance of what's going on the basketball court for Miami Heat? Now, just imagine there was a situation where the Heat could just rent OG Anunoby for a couple of games. Does that tilt the balance in this series? Just throwing OG Anunoby on the Miami Heat. Now, granted, it's a hell of a player, and it would cost the Miami Heat an arm and a leg to get him. But I'm just saying, does that one guy tip what's happening here? Because he shuts down so much, and he makes so many things possible. You look at a guy like a Precious Achua, right? Does a Precious Achua get minutes for the Miami Heat? Granted, he's a former Miami Heat player, but despite all of his shortcomings, is he exactly the type of defender, just a Scotty Barnes tip the series? You look at guys like this and you say, well, what can they do? What they can do is they can shut down the gap between Jokic and Murray, right? Because naturally, you're going to send a double over to Jokic. The impact of that double is going to come down to how much it's taking away from Nikola Jokic and his passing lanes and his ability to shoot over defenders, etc. You can't send it soft because he's going to pick you apart. Then from that point on, it comes down to your ability to now recover to the next guy. And all of this is going to be aided greatly by length. So the Raptors are, for all intents and purposes, perhaps going to be announcing their head coach hire probably today or tomorrow. So I could be early on this. I don't know. It might come this weekend, but it should be happening very soon. So at some point, someone's going to come in and they're going to have to implement some sort of system. And a lot of people have made some noise about how the Raptors situation isn't as desirable as this situation, that situation. I think for a creative, defensive minded head coach, this is the most desirable situation of all because what you have is a tool chest to stop any star in the league. Now, you may not believe that because the Raptors weren't a great defensive team this year, and they didn't even make the playoffs. So how are we talking about stopping stars? But really, it comes down to this. In every single playoff series I can imagine, it always comes down to, is my guy better than your guy? And if your guy has to go up against my world level defense, which is designed to shut that guy down, well, then my guy might actually have a chance. And in this case, my guy being Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, whoever your guy is going forward. I think there's a real coherence to the philosophy that the Raptors have built with. You don't look at guys like Christian Brown, and I think there might actually be a bit of a precedence here for the type of player the Raptors are usually going for, right? Which is a guy who can limit space, cut down angles, move without the basketball. I think there are some similarities here between a guy like a Christian Brown and someone like a Cason Wallace or someone like a Bilal Koulibaly, someone like that, right? So I think that, again, you look at the pieces the Raptors have in place. You have a system that has somewhat loosely been established by Nick Nurse. Granted, chemistry was off this year, contracts, distractions, all that stuff. But the groundwork is there. The groundwork is there. The personnel is there. The roster is there to play in a way that is, quite frankly, very conducive to how NBA teams like to play offense. You're basically building a counter team to every team that has a chance at all. Whether you're talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers, you're talking about the Boston Celtics, you're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, the Denver Nuggets, you are designed to match up with all of those teams. That's the way I see it. You have the personnel and the key pieces to defend all of their pet plays, all of their desired actions. You have that. You have 3 or 4 guys who you can put on the court at the same time who can virtually shut down passing angles completely. That's really what's working right now. MJ Jones. Mason saying Raptors need a point guard that can get to the rim and create good looks. I believe we need to move on from Fred and maybe we can see what we can get for KG since we can't afford him, sadly. Who's KG? You mean Gary Trent? Interesting. Oh, OG. I think we can afford him. Sure, I think it's going to be about $30 million. I think the real caveat here will be what they do with Pascal Siakam. Is there a team desperate enough? Is there a team that thinks that they're edging close enough that you can maybe wiggle off that contract. But I think that there is like something here. Spooky Ghostwriter saying it's 5:40 a.m. Why are you up? Well, I had allergies like last night, and I wanted to do this live, like this post game live about the Denver Nuggets winning Game 3, and I couldn't do it. And then I wanted to do it last night, and then I ended up getting allergies again. I don't know what's going on, man. The weather is weird. Like everything that's going on with the smog in Toronto, everything that's going on, like being like, y'all see the pictures of New York? It's like it's shrouded in like a orange sepia filter. It's weird. Um, so yeah, so I was just playing chess and I was working on some editing stuff, some pen stuff, and I realized, hey man, it's like 5:30 in the morning, and it's time for my morning coffee. Let me do a live. It's also been like a little bit strange because I'm in between laptops and stuff. Like I gotta get a new laptop because the stupidest thing happened while my Mac was uploading or updating to the new OS. Like I crashed it, and now I'm just stuck in Mac purgatory where literally nothing is working. Like I turn it on and it says previous version is not installed. So yeah, how you guys feeling about the finals so far? Honestly, man, like I love it. I think we are watching. So here's the thing, growing up as a European kid, heard a lot of stories about Arvydas Sabonis, right? A lot of stories about this mythical 7'2" guy who could make passes behind the back and full court passes behind his back, and it was just crazy to watch. And of course, like we got a little taste of it in 2000. I think it was in 1996-97 when a very broken down version of Arvydas Sabonis came to the Portland Trailblazers. And I would be remiss if I'd not tell you that even at that state, he was one of the 4 or 5 best centers in the NBA, right up there with Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson. He was right there. And he didn't play a lot of minutes because the Portland Trailblazers were very deep. They had Brian Grant, they had Rasheed Wallace. And, I think that because there was still that sort of obsession with raw box score numbers, that a guy averaging 13 or 14 points was never going to get the type of clout that he deserved. But if you go back and you really study his impact on offense and defense, you would realize that Arvydas Sabonis was one of the maybe 45 to 50 best players in the NBA for most of his NBA career. And that was basically like the finished version of him. Like he was done. Like injuries had ravaged that man's career. So in a lot of ways, what I'm watching with Nikola Jokic is like a perfected version of that player. Now, I find it interesting that every single time people talk about what Jokic is doing, they always find a way to compare him to other white guys. They compare him to Dirk. They compare him to, Larry Bird. And here I am comparing him to another white European guy named Arvydas Sabonis. I actually do think that there's a lot that he has in common with some of the greatest players of all time. Seeing a lot of course, I'm seeing a lot of Bird, but a lot of Magic as well. Um, the way that he is just controlling this game, the way that he's able to, and I mean, one of the things that's somewhat underrated, his defense, his hands on defense, like his ability to move on defense is really underrated. Like I saw this guy shut down so many things that Bam Adebayo wanted to do in Game 3. And granted, it's not always there. He sometimes does, give up some easy bunnies around the basket. There's some rotations that are late, etc. He's not a great defender by any means, but the way that he's been built up as like this terrible defender is just it's criminally insane, quite frankly. And of course, there's a lot of people now who are talking about, is he the best player in the world? Yes, he's been the best player in the world for a while now, right? It really, um, King Agyam, good morning, man. I love both teams. I love Kyle. I'm a day one Raptor fan, so you can imagine what it meant to me to see a chip watching years of failure and NBA teams shaming us. So it's good to see us win. Absolutely, man. Like Kyle Lowry is always going to have a special place in Raptor fans' hearts. I fully believe that. But yeah, like I'm firmly rooting for the team that I think is going to win, and the team that I've sort of been rooting for ever since the Boston Celtics got eliminated, which is granted not too long ago. I'll be honest, like if it was Boston versus Denver, I have no idea who I'd be rooting for, because to me, like Jason Tatum and Nikola Jokic are like two of my favorite players in the league. like right up there with Scotty. Like Scotty, and then it's like I'm not sure who number 2 is. I'm pretty sure OG's number 5 and KD's number 4, but it's like Jokic, Tatum. Um, I love Kyle Lowry. I respect him, but he's not one of my favorite players. And I don't know. Um, I wouldn't mind watching. I wouldn't mind seeing him win a championship. Same thing with Jimmy Butler, man. I think like at this point, I think I like Jimmy Butler more than I like Kyle Lowry. But there's also like something to be said about like the roles that people have on a team. Kyle's a backup guard at this point. Granted, he's still a hell of an impact player, and there's a lot of stuff that he does on a nightly basis where I'm just like, shit. Like I wish Fred VanVleet would do that. Like the way that he controls pace and stuff. It's great. I don't know, man. Like it's been weird to create content because I'm watching other people make Raptors content, right? I am. I'm watching them, and it's not shade, man. Like, but it's like, how many times can we go through the coaching carousel of like, well, this is what Jordy Fernandez would do, and this is what Sergio Scariolo would do, and this is what David Adelman. The truth is, none of these guys have been head coaches before. We have no idea. I mean, they've never been head coaches in the NBA. We have no idea. It's just conjecture and hypothesis, and we can opine all day about, will the players respect Becky Hammond? Will, this thing happen and that thing happen? The truth is, like, man, nobody knows, right? Like, you can guess. But there's a lot of reasons why I have faith in what the Raptors are doing right now. You consider, like, take a bird's eye view on this, right? The Raptors identified that culture was a problem this year, right? That vibe, chemistry, culture, etc. That they weren't about the right stuff. They called it out. And I'm really happy about that. Obviously, as the channel that was literally bitching about it pretty much consistently all year, it felt quite great to watch the president, the general manager kind of echo the same sentiments, and then to start seeing moves that really do suggest that they kind of get that, hey, man, like the culture wasn't right here. This has been selfish. It's kind of interesting now, obviously, to watch in light of what happened with Nick Nurse when it really, when shit hit the fan, which was in Philly. Now to watch him in Philly, that's kind of an interesting sort of tidbit that has been sort of glossed over, is that whole meltdown with the media happened in Philly. And now not only do you have Nick Nurse going to coach Philadelphia, you also have rumors of Fred VanVleet being their option. I'm very curious to see what happens with Phoenix. Not to jump too much, but I'm very curious to see what happens with Phoenix. Reports about Chris Paul potentially being waived, but still wanting to stay on with the team. I don't know. I mean, if they don't waive him, if Mark Stein's wrong, they don't waive him, would you accept Chris Paul back in a sign and trade? I wonder. Does that kind of reset the culture? Does that keep you competitive for a year and then give you a massive expiring contract? As opposed to Fred VanVleet. Is Chris Paul better than Fred VanVleet right now? I don't know. I think it's pretty close, to be honest. Is this the 2-game suspension for that thing that she did? I do think that, if she was a serious candidate, I do think that put a little bit of I think that would have halted her momentum a little bit, to be honest. Yeah. But I think that the Raptors have it right. Is generally the vibe and the overall message of this is, I think that the Raptors have correctly identified the way the league is going. I think they've correctly identified the types of players that are going to be able to be really valuable in the league, and they're really hoarding up on a lot of them, right? And even when you look at players who sort of failed with the Raptors and call it failure, Patrick McCaw, Stanley Johnson, like there's so many guys that they've kind of cracked at it and it hasn't quite worked out. And they kind of fit that mold, don't they? Right? They kind of fit that mold of guys who could realistically, in the best case scenario, whether you look at a Delano Banton, okay, Delano Banton hasn't necessarily popped for the Raptors yet. You look at a Jeff Doughton, I think like you're starting to see like a consistent vision of the type of player that they want. And, whatever you want to call it, Vision 6'9", Vision 6'8", Vision 6'7", we're seeing the fruits of that. Like we're seeing, how much those types of players are tending to be very useful in the finals, especially when it comes to stopping stars. Um, yeah, that was interesting, and it took a while for me. Like I didn't pick up on it the first time I heard it, right? And then someone kind of made me like go back. They're like, no, 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 he definitely did say that, and I was like, yo, wow, like he hasn't even hit free agency yet. He hasn't technically even opted out yet, and he's talking about might go to Philly, and it's just like to me, it's just I started this off season in the try to bring him back, try to make it work, sort of, like I mean, I was open to okay, you get a great offer, move on, but I was still in the mindset of like, okay, if you can retool around it, if he can get over his ego a little bit, it could still be salvageable, et cetera, et cetera. But I just don't feel that way anymore. I just don't like I'm just ready for this chapter to be over. I don't think the Raptors going to suffer like as much as people think they are. I know it's probably very scary for them. They probably feel like, "Oh my god, like we're going to lose like 20 more games without this guy." I assure you are not. And okay, granted, like you're not going to get better just because he leaves. He's not an addition by subtraction. He's a good player and he adds a very valuable skill set. But I just think that if you can, I don't know, if you can manage a sign and trade and you can get a couple of useful pieces back, I genuinely think like the impact will be negligible. You know, like yeah, I mean, look, like Fred VanVleet does a lot of good things that show up in the that show up in the analytics, but he also does a lot of things. And we spent all year harping about how he doesn't see advantages in transition. He's not the fastest player. He doesn't always push the pace very well. He's kind of like in the way of Scotty taking the reins as point guard and is a natural position as a lead initiator. Um, and obviously he can be, he can be hunted like in terms of mismatches. So even though he does a really good job of like as a help defender, I do think that there's like some consequence of that. I mean, another thing you could probably look at in terms of like the Vision 6'9" thing is look how big the Nuggets are. I mean, their smallest player, Jamal Murray, who's legitimately 6'4.5", 6'5". So if the Raptors want to replace Fred VanVleet with Gary Trent Jr. in the starting lineup. Let's just say hypothetically they start Scotty at the 1 and Gary at the 2, OG at the 3, Pascal at 4, Jakob at 5. Well, now guess what? You're bigger than the Nuggets. You might be the biggest team in the NBA. I think that's a really solid place to start. And you really think that that lineup is going to end up in the lottery? I mean, they might, but they're not going to be like a bottom feeding team. Like you're not going to be surrendering like a bottom 5 pick to the San Antonio Spurs, especially, by the way, especially if Scotty takes a step up. Like you're talking about a low level play in team. Okay, well, great. That's a step up from last year. And you're super young. Your backcourt is 24. You're okay. I mean, like you got OG, Scotty, and Gary. That's a 25-year-old going on 26, a 24-year-old, and you got like a 21-year-old going on 22. I mean, that's a pretty young team. And if you're in the play-in, provided and I mean, look, at some point you're gonna have to look at this and say, okay, well, last year we barely had minutes for the eighth or ninth guy, whoever the hell that was, right? In moments, you got Christian Coloco some minutes, but then Precious Achiuwa was out. Uh, None of those guys were getting as many minutes as they did if Otto was healthy. I mean, even if you pushed that out, Thad wasn't even playing for you. So in a lot of ways, like you bring in a 13th pick, you probably is going to be a wing or a guard. I very much doubt it's going to be a big. You need to clear up some minutes for that player to play. And you also have your mid-level exception, which ideally you're going to sign a player that you intend to play. I mean, I've never seen the Raptors sign a guy for the mid-level and not play him every single year. I mean, whether you talk about it worked out, it didn't work out, almost every single time they've used a mid-level exception, it's been on a guy who is a top 7, top 8 guy in their rotation. So you are talking about 2 rotation pieces that are coming into your team next year. Something's got to give, right? I mean, technically, if you talk about Otto coming back, that's 3 rotation pieces coming back and none going out. You're gonna go. I mean, I know there a lot has been made about Sergio Scariolo, playing 11 deep and 12 deep in Europe. You're not playing 12 deep in the NBA. You're also not factoring in that Jeff Doughton is probably going to get converted to a full, like full contract. You're not factoring in, the potential that a Precious Achua could become a major rotation piece. Again, I'm not talking in flowery hypotheticals of like, oh my God, Malachi Flynn's going to become an MVP candidate. I'm talking about like realistic, chartable, projectable, expected growth from your roster. Mason Culligan saying, I like Trent more than Fred. Now, it depends on what you like. I mean, from the factor of age, fit, probably, you can make a very strong argument that Gary's a better fit. Probably come for a little less money too, right? So the cheaper, younger, better fitting option. Fred is definitely the better player for sure, though. Yeah, Raptors can't trade Siakam to Portland. No picks next year. We got to trade Fred VanVleet, something maybe Ayton, him, and Pirtle can split. DeAndre Ayton? You want DeAndre Ayton on this team? Holy shit. No, I don't personally. I mean, there are very few players in this league that I want less on my team than DeAndre Ayton at that contract. I don't really understand the logic of this one. Like, okay, let's say for instance you do trade Pascal Siakam to this, for this Anthony Simon, Shaden Sharp. Like, I don't think you get an Anthony plus Shaden plus, Jeremy Grant. I don't know what people think, they're going to get, but let's just say it's Anthony Simons and Shaden Sharp, or Anthony Simons plus number 3. Okay, great. That's 2 rotation pieces going out for 1 rotation piece. You see what I mean? I mean, Anthony Simons is probably going to start for you, probably at the 2. That pushes Gary to the bench. Now I'm not really sure what you're planning on doing at number 3. If you're drafting Brandon Miller, you're drafting Emin Thompson, or, if God forbid, not God forbid, God willing, that Scoot Henderson is there, that's a rotation piece for sure that you're starting. So, like, do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, at some point you just have to ask yourself, like, where are we finding minutes for 10 rotation guys? And at some point, you do have to realize you're going to have to keep all of these guys too. And under the new CBA, that's not easy either. So I think that, yeah, I prefer Jakob over DeAndre Ayton if the money was even closer. I mean, I'd take Jakob at 20 over DeAndre Ayton at 32 or 33 or whatever the hell he signed for, because he's not worth it. And I just don't want to have to worry about one of my starters' mental state, going into games. Like, I don't want to have to worry about, is this guy going to show up or not show up? Like, you can have a bad game, but I don't want to have to worry about like you being a knucklehead and just not showing up. And there are far too many guys in the league that fall into that category, in my opinion. So I don't know. I think the Raptors are in a good spot. Whenever I talk to my friends down south, like, it just feels like the Raptors are just the worst team. They got nothing going on. Pascal's a bum. He's overrated. Scotty's regressed. Blah 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 blah. OG's gonna walk. Fred's gonna walk. This guy's gonna walk. Nick Nurse is holding this up, and I'm just like, yo, like, maybe I'm wrong, but I genuinely believe that there is something to this team that projects forward in a really good way. I think this team has the potential to surprise. I think Nick Nurse and everything that was happening with the chemistry really massively suppressed not only the team performance, but I think certain individual performances. I think for years under Dwayne Casey, I argued that the sum and the parts were totally like not adding up. Like, you had a team that on paper looked like it should be able to get like 45 wins, and somehow they end up with 57 wins because they have chemistry and fit, and they love playing together, and they don't take plays off, and they, there's just like a sum and the parts do not match, right? This year was like the exact opposite of that, where I'm looking at on paper, this team should be super competitive, especially once you add a Jakob Poeltl. Like, you one of the better teams in the East right now, and you get bounced by Chicago, a team that, quite frankly, had no business bouncing you in the play-in. And that's just where I'm at right now. And it's hard to say that because obviously that didn't happen for you, right? You just talking about hypotheticals. You're talking about this hypothetical, universe in which Scotty was like a 20-point per game scorer. OG took a bigger step forward. Pascal didn't regress as much on defense. Jakob fit a little bit better. Fred was a better passer, like blah, 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 like, and everything sort of synergized. But I just think that the right coach will unlock this team to be better. Again, I'm open to being wrong, but the reason that I was so critical of this team all year is not because they're bums who are playing like bums. It's honestly because they're a really good team that was playing this disastrous brand of basketball that is just not conducive to winning. And, I've looked a lot into why human beings tend to lean towards conspiracy. You know what I mean? Like why are we so subconsciously prone to believing in conspiracy theories? Like when I say, oh, the NBA is rigged, why does like 50 people just jump up and be like, yeah, it's rigged? Like, why is that so easy to just fall into? I think conspiracy is easy to fall into because, we live in an increasingly complex world. I don't think there's a conspiracy about what happened this year. I don't. I think what happened this year is what happens in a lot of companies where people have uncertain futures and uncertain relationships. The Raptors are not alone in what happened to them this year. A really good example of another team that had a similar sort of rise, fall, crescendo, arc would be the Golden State Warriors. I mean, you see it sort of happened with Draymond Green. I mean, another team, granted, they made it a lot further than the Raptors, is the Boston Celtics. I think all of these teams are examples of teams in which, another example would be the Atlanta Hawks. I think those four teams come to mind in terms of teams that just really, really underperformed relative to the talent that they had. And, like the asset suffers, right? Suddenly people are talking about Jonathan Kuminga like he's a throw-in in a trade because Steve Kerr didn't want to, he didn't want to play him. James Wiseman's a bum. And he may just be a bum. I have no idea. But until someone like breaks apart his brain and figures out what he, cares about or doesn't care about, I can't say for sure. You look at, what happened with the Boston Celtics, Jaylen Brown, like the disgruntledness, like did that show up in the playoffs? Did we see a little bit of that disharmony? Because they certainly were more talented than Miami Heat, even without Malcolm Brogdon. They certainly should not have been down 0-3 to that team. How much does chemistry play a part into that? How much does the fact that they have a rookie head coach play a part into that? And I look at a team like the Golden State Warriors, as I mentioned, you have Draymond Green punching Jordan Poole pretty much, in training camp. And that team just never recovers. And you see Jordan Poole regress, and you see Jonathan Kuminga regress, and Moses Moody hasn't taken a step. And it's just a vibe. Like the whole vibe is fucked, right? And so you got to ask yourself, is this really who these players are? Is this really, who Jordan Poole is now? Where did he go from being the third splash brother to a guy who can barely get minutes in the playoffs? How did that happen, right? And it's the same thing with, Andrew Wiggins. People were talking about Andrew Wiggins like a bum, like a few years ago. Suddenly, Andrew Wiggins is better than, every small forward in the NBA, save for four guys. And it's just like, how the hell did that happen, right? It's all about vibe and situation. I really believe that chemistry can adjust a player's performance up or down about 10%, right? What is Pascal Siakam plus 10%? What is Scotty Barnes plus 10%? What's OG Anunoby plus 10%? You have to look at it plus or minus 10%. Like in a really bad situation, you're talking about a swing. So if you talk about really bad situation, Toronto Raptors, really good situation, Sacramento Kings, right? Or Denver Nuggets. Are we talking extreme high chemistry versus extreme low chemistry? That's a swing of 20%, man. I really believe that. I think like there's a 20% swing between the worst and best case outcome of chemistry. So if you're talking 20% better Scotty Barnes, you're talking about a very different player. 20% better. 20% better across the board, just as a player. Now, I really think that the effective chemistry can be that large. And I think we've seen it time and time again when guys move from a bad situation to a good situation. It's just like, my God, I mean, these are human beings, right? Like you can't, um, oh man, I definitely did not sleep yet. That's for sure. Um, Kevin Lazaro saying we need two-way point guard and more shooting, draft Kaysen and hire JJ. I'm with you on the draft Kaysen part. I am not with you on the um, hire JJ part. I mean, what's your thought process here? Because he shot well, that suddenly the team's going to shoot well, or you think maybe he'd be like a player coach and he just come off the bench and shoot some jump shots for you? Um, I want to know what he said to Green to get that mad to knock you out. I mean, honestly, like, fights happen in practices all the time. Like, I don't want to say all the time, but like, I know at least like 2 to 3 times a year, guys have to be separated in a practice or whatever. Now, most of these practices are closed off to the media, to cell phones, et cetera, et cetera. So no one hears about it. You hear about it on a podcast like 7 years later, like we heard about the almost fight between Rasheed Wallace and Arvydas Sabonis. You know what I mean? Like these things leak after the fact. Just so happens that this one got, it got caught on camera, it got leaked to TMZ. Somebody leaked it. Somebody should be fired for that for sure because it derailed an entire season. But you got to look at it from the perspective of like, why does that even exist? Well, let's do the math here. Jordan Poole got paid a ton of money. Draymond Green is looking for a ton of money on his next contract. And I can guarantee you that Golden State is his only bet to get that money because there's not another team in this league that is willing to pay Draymond Green a max contract or anything close to a max contract. And he knows this. He knows this. He knows that winning a championship, Jordan Poole, ascending, Andrew Wiggins ascending, these two guys got paid. They got paid, but he didn't get paid. And he was a better player than both those guys last year. He was more instrumental to the championship. So he's salty about it. He's salty about it the same way Fred VanVleet's salty about it. He's salty about it. And that's why these guys all get along. I'll just be honest. And whatever, get paid, right? Like you're not going to blame a guy for wanting to get paid. You're not going to blame him for thinking that he's better than Jordan Poole, but he's not being realistic about the asset value, right? Now, obviously, as someone who studies the analytics and cares about like that side of the game, I don't think Jordan Poole is better than Draymond Green, but I think he's worth more money than Draymond Green. And I can completely understand where that distinction is lost on a lot of people. Like someone like Fred VanVleet might look at the impact metrics and say, I am better than Scotty Barnes. Why are they giving him preferential treatment? Why is he worth more money on the open market than me? And that's sort of the youth, potential, all that stuff, fit, marketability, all that other stuff, right? And you could probably look at guys like Draymond Green and Fred VanVleet and consider them salty and, petulant children. Or you can say, well, if they didn't have that belief in themselves, they didn't bet on themselves, they weren't so stubborn, they weren't so such egomaniacs, they probably wouldn't have even made it past their initial starting ground. Like both guys were, seniors, both guys came out as very unheralded prospects. I mean, both guys had to fight and claw their way into NBA rotations. Nothing was given. So, yeah, I can understand why they probably feel like they lost money at the beginning of their career and they're still trying to get it back because the first contract that Draymond got after his rookie contract was not a big contract. He has out earned all of his contracts. You could probably look at a guy like Fred VanVleet and say he's definitely out earned his contract. And this is in a league in which guys like Jordan Poole aren't even coming close to earning their contracts. So yeah, you can fully understand why these guys are a little bit salty, and you can understand why Jaylen Brown is a little bit salty. You can understand why Pascal Siakam or Fred VanVleet are salty. You can understand why every one of these situations exists. And it almost always comes down to money, status. Money, status. That's it. And, you know, for the Warriors, yeah, it's a bit of a house of cards situation. There's been a lot going on behind the scenes with Joe Lacob and, Steve Kerr. And there's been like a bit of a kumbaya wash, like Steph Curry, Clay Thompson, a lot of winning. It makes a lot of things kind of go away, right? And it's the same thing with the Raptors, DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry, Dwayne Casey. That makes a lot of things go away. It just washes over a lot of stuff, right? You have a guy disgruntled in the locker room, suddenly smooth it out. You know what I mean? But I mean, now the Raptors hit adversity really for the first time since Tampa, really, and they crumble. They crumble both times, really. They aren't able to eke it out. And honestly, in Tampa, at least you had Kyle Lowry, right? Previous year, before last year was the first time without Kyle. And, you sensed some grumblings, you sensed some dissatisfaction, but you win. And winning solves a lot of stuff. This year, you just saw. I think you just saw the floor kind of cave in from underneath. And again, I don't. I don't always think that. Usually when I'm thinking about players that I want to trade for, I'm looking at players on teams like the Raptors. I'm looking at players like a Delano Banton and a Malachi Flynn on another team. If I was, scouting for the Atlanta Hawks, or if I was scouting for the Sacramento Kings, I'm looking at players like Precious Achua. I'm looking at guys who are in these situations where chemistry has been hit or miss, leadership's been hit or miss, coach had one foot out the door, and I'm thinking, what could I get out of these guys that this situation didn't give them a chance to show? Because that's really the market value. At the end of the day, you're not going to be able to take it to the bank. Precious Chua can't take his potential to the bank any more than I can take mine, right? I hope we get Koulibaly or Kaysen in this draft. Koulibaly just looks so fluid. It reminds me of Scotty with the length and D minus the passing, and Kaysen just solid as fuck with mine either. Honestly, one of the things that I've been most impressed with so far with Koulibaly is his passing. I think he's got a little bit more to show there than maybe a lot of people realize. He hasn't really had like primary initiator runs, but I think he's shown like a solid like connector ability. I'm not saying he'd be able to run your offense or play point guard or something, but I think he makes solid reads. Um, the more I think about him, the more I'm realizing like I think he would be such a dream fit for the Raptors. I love his length. Yeah, man, me too. I mean, 7'2". He is just prototypical. You could just plug and play. Like you could just drop him into this series that's happening right now. I'm not sure if he's NBA ready necessarily, but like in a couple of years, you could definitely see him like being the type of guy who could swing a series like this. Just because of the switchability. Like he seems like a really strong player for 18, right? He's got like a really solid build. He's got those wide shoulders. Um, he's got great standing reach. Like you could see him like potentially being able to contribute on the glass, contribute in terms of like pace. Um, Probably great for transition and just a guy in the open court who can put some pressure on the rim. Um, yeah, I'm like open to Kobe Buffkin as well. Like I really hey James. Um why though? I mean, don't the Cavs have enough all D no offense guys at the 3 spot? Um you know what? I would cry. I would cry really hard if he went to the Cavs, because the only thing worse than imagining like a front court of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley and having to face that front court for the next 4 years is to add Bilal Coulibaly to that mix. And in case he pops, like you have a 6'7", like Giannis Antetokounmpo type of athlete with that type of length who could just complement that core so well. I mean, when you just said Bilal on the Cavs, I was just like, shit, if that worked out, like that would be scary. That is scary. I mean, you know, it's just not true. Like, it's not true, right? Like, there's this sort of narrative that the Raptors can't score, that they have all these guys who can't score. It's just not true, man. They didn't have an offensive system. all these guys are scoring in like these very stupid ways. I mean, what was I really complaining about all year? It was not a lack of talent. It's not like Jakob Poeltl can't score. It's not like Scotty Barnes can't score. It's not like OG Anunoby can't score. I mean, plenty of these guys have had stretches in their career where they've averaged 20 points per game or whatever. It's not like, Fred VanVleet or, Pascal Siakam or Gary Trent Jr. can't put the ball in the basket. They absolutely can. The issue really was all the other stuff that needs to be done in order for scoring to happen. The off-ball movement, the dynamicism, like the dynamics of how you score. Like are you getting guys who just do it one way, or you have guys who are threats to do it 6, 7 different ways? I think there's also a lot of incomplete players in the Raptors. Guys who are like really, really great at initiating the offense, but maybe not completing plays. There's guys who may be great at completing plays, but not really great at initiating the offense. There's guys who are like really strong on ball players, but they don't do shit off the ball. So you just have like a complete mismatch. And that's what a system is supposed to do. It's supposed to put guys in situations to do well. Now, let's just say, for instance, the Sacramento Kings decided to invert their entire offense and put De'Aaron Fox in the post, run their, pick and roll as a pick and roll ball handler. They decided to invert it and put Sabonis at the top. And then every so often, like every 3 plays, they just handed the ball to Kevin Huerter and said, hey, dribble and create something off the dribble for us, off the bounce, like get into the paint and do something. They would be they would have the number 1 pick right now if you just made those 3 changes. So, and at that point, people would be like, oh, Kevin Huerter can't score. Sabonis can't do this. I mean, guys can't show you what they didn't get a chance to show you. What is true? I mean, I understand the value of shooting. Don't get me wrong, right? Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, like Jamal Murray, Kevin Porter, we're seeing the value of 3-point shooting, right? I get that. But there's so much more to it, right? Like the value of screen setting, defense, switchability, um, you know, just like the soft stuff, like that makes basketball. You know what I mean? Like the the reads, like how quickly do you read and react on defense? I think these things are there, and I just think that the Raptors have like these very interesting pieces that could work together. Like a lot of them could work together. They just didn't. They just didn't work together. And I think Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster have a right to fire a coach. I mean, you can look at Nick Nurse's firing one of 1,000 different ways. You can definitely look at it as, he kind of wanted to leave and they kind of granted his wish. You can look at it as he kind of bailed on the ship. You can look at it as time has run its course. Or you can obviously look at it and say, he finished 41 and 41, and that was clearly not good enough. That they looked at this roster up and down and said, this is significantly better than a 41 and 41 roster. Could we interpret it that way? Right. And I mean, I think that's a fair take. I think that's a really fair take. I think the talent was there to be a 50-win team. But who's to say the Raptors don't have shooting? All of their players can shoot with the exception of Jakob Poeltl. Granted, some of them did not shoot very well. I think the same thing that I said earlier comes into play about the 20% swing between chemistry. I mean, we can agree that a guy can go from a 37% year to a 31% year back to a 37% year, right? Like we can also agree that a 41% 3-point shooter can shoot 34% for a season for a myriad of reasons, be that injury, be that scheme, be that, tired legs on defense. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I just think that we haven't seen the Raptors. And I think that what the Raptors are works. Like, I think this finals is proving it, that the way that Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster have gone about building this team with long switchable defenders, it would go very well into stopping either one of these finals teams, in my opinion. Like, you might think I'm crazy, but I really think the Raptors could have a competitive series against the Denver Nuggets or the Miami Heat. Think that's crazy? I mean, a team that didn't even make the playoffs could give. I'm not saying they would win in either series. I'm saying they would be in all of the games. Like they wouldn't get walked by either one of these teams. Now you might think I'm crazy on that, but I really think that the Raptors were a 16 game type of, they say 82, there's an 82 game coach and a 16 game coach. There's 82 game teams and 16 game teams. I think the Raptors were built for the playoffs. I think a lot of the isolation reps that they were getting were going to come in handy in the playoffs. I think a lot of the defensive switchability and schemes were going to be the type of defenses that really do stop playoff offenses, Yeah, I really do. Well, I didn't say that they were balanced. I mean, clearly, like they have pieces that are incomplete or pieces that are somewhat missing. But you look at guys like that. The philosophy has been right, in my opinion. You look at even the biggest misses like Otto Porter. Like I think the philosophy is right on him. He is exactly the type of player that either the Miami Heat or the Denver Nuggets would play if healthy right now. Major minutes. Like he would play major minutes. OG would play major minutes. Pascal would play major minutes. Scotty would play major minutes for either team. You have Fred VanVleet would play major minutes for either one of these teams. Fred VanVleet would start over Gabe Vincent, in my opinion. He would probably be like the sixth man for the Denver Nuggets. Every player who played minutes for the Raptors would play minutes for either one of these teams. And I'm not saying they would be exactly the role that they're in right now, but OG and Pascal would start on either one of those teams. Guaranteed. You know what I mean? Like you got players. Like how many players on the Charlotte Bobcats, or sorry, Charlotte Hornets, could you really say that about other than LaMelo Ball? Oh, they would definitely start on a finals team. You know what I mean? Like we got to look at it from that perspective. You can argue all day that Pascal is not the star. Fine. Either the system didn't work. Fine. They got holes. Fine. The synergy didn't work. Fine. Scotty needs to be a better shooter. Fine. All of that is fine. But the point here is that your top 8 guys would be top 8 guys on most teams that are good, right? It's not like the Raptors are playing guys who would just be out of rotation for most teams. Your top 7 guys would be rotation players for every single contender. Would they not? Tell me I'm wrong. Rob, you're ready to join the front office now. They're not just picking these specific players for no reason. Nadeem saying, who do you like at the point guard position? Scotty, clearly. I would wear a shirt that says Scotty is a point guard if that were at all socially acceptable. Pops Mensah as replaceable cattle, like assets that generate them revenue. When there's people like Dolan running teams, I don't see why players shouldn't be somewhat selfish. That's fair. That's a completely fair point, man. And when you start looking at what these players make after all the taxes, state tax, federal tax, agent cut, whatever, you see like a 32, 33 million salary cut down to like 14 million. And you're like, oof. I'm not saying $14 million a year isn't like serious money. But then you start thinking about those guys who are like haggling over like, I don't know, 25 to $30 million. And you're like, at base minimum, they're probably going to clear 10 of that. So, you get it. You get it. TR Mike, I can make that shirt happen. Scotty is a point guard. That would be funny. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great day. This is a bit of an impromptu live. I hope that at some point we do have some good news about the Raptors coaching decision. I think it'll be a move that does set a lot of pieces into place. And I think that it'll have an impact on the type of players that you can expect, in free agency and in the draft. One thing that all of the coaching candidates they've looked at so far have in common, whether that be Jordy, David Adelman, Sergio Scariolo, every one of these guys have a development mindset. Like they all have that sort of culture setter, development, get the chemistry back on pace, type of guys. So, I mean, they're not really looking at necessarily X's and O's guys. I wouldn't. Okay, so here's something that kind of scared me today. I was watching an interview with Masai Ujiri very recently on Forbes, and asked about what he remembers about Orlando, because as some of you may know, Masai Ujiri was a scout for the Orlando Magic, and he said Doc Rivers. Oof. Masai does not say shit for nothing. And I mean, I fully understand why he would remember Doc Rivers, because Doc was a coach back then and, all that stuff. But need I remind you, Doc Rivers is available as a head coach. Could that be what's holding this up? Could he be a secret dark horse candidate? God, I really hope not. He has been like my least favorite coach in the league for like 15 years straight. Whenever someone's asked me like most overrated coach, Doc Rivers, just don't even think. He's always like, oh my God. What? Thrilled if they fired Masai? Yo. It is not hard. It's not easy to have me completely stunned and out of breath and unable to find words, but this comment does it for me. That's crazy. One of the best executives in the league, and you want him fired. Wow. Over a year, man? Come on. Come on. Let's not be like, what have you done for me lately? You have had the most stable organization apart from the Golden State Warriors for the last 12 years, 10 years. 10 years? Yeah, 10 years. That's a decade. A decade of stability. Need I remind you what preceded that? It was horrible. So I'm not. Nah. No, I would not be comfortable with that, especially because I know that Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment would be hiring the replacement. And unlike last time, they're not going to have Tim Lewicki here to guide them into, oh, you need to hire Masai. It's going to be someone else. I don't know. I definitely think Masai is the right person for this. I think he gets it. I think he's doing the right stuff. I really do. I mean, and like, if you've been following this channel for like the last 7-8 months, you know that I'm not afraid to be critical of Masai Ujiri and of this team or this coaching staff. Like, obviously, like, I have no problem with it. But when I genuinely disagree with something, I'll tell you. But I don't disagree with Vision 6-9. I don't disagree with their draft philosophy usually. I certainly do not disagree with the things that they found to be wrong with this team, at least those that they've publicly voiced, That's funny. Michael Spence saying, I'm not surprised the Raptors are taking so long to decide. They do this every time they have a decision to make. Always wait last minute. In fairness, they did wait a very long time before hiring Nick Nurse. It was excruciatingly long. I remember it being like, was it almost 3 weeks? It was pretty long. So, granted, and this has been longer. This is dragged out for almost a month now, right? But there have been some interesting, setbacks. Namely, if Ime Udoka was the guy, he gets scooped up. There's been like openings that have opened up. Maybe you had a guy like Kenny Atkinson or someone in mind, or maybe you had, I don't know, Adrian Griffin in mind. I have no idea. And then suddenly a coaching job. It's just, there's a lot of variables that have come across. But I'm confident that the Raptors appreciate, one of the things that I've realized, just being in relationships. And I know that sometimes it's kind of stupid to compare running a multi-billion-dollar sports franchise to just, discussions with friendships and girlfriends and shit like this. But one of the things that I've always looked for is, do we identify the same problem? I think that's the first step. Because if we can't even identify the the thing that I think is a problem is the same thing that you think is a problem. Like, we can't even come to any sort of agreement on that. Well, then now we have a much bigger problem than, you know, not being able to see eye to eye on a solution. You can't even come to terms with the fact that the problem that I think is a problem is a problem. That's and that's a problem. You see what I mean? You see what I mean, right? That's going to be like deeply, deeply like that's that's quotable. I need to put that in a book. My point is that if Masai Ujiri had come out and not identified culture, selfishness as a problem, if they had not identified, this philosophy of switching everything, like these things that they are attempting to do, these are valiant attempts at building a contending team. The things that they prioritized in Scotty Barnes, from his culture setting ability to his positional versatility, these are things that you should be looking for. There are teams out there, and Raptor fans may not be aware of this because you probably haven't followed a team like this in the last decade, that really don't have a clue about what's winning in the NBA right now. They don't have a clue about what a great prospect looks like. They don't find OG Ananobis and Pascal Siakams and Scotty Barnes in the draft because they don't even know what to look for. I think the Raptors consistently know what to look for. Now, whether they find it or not is not necessarily always the point. And you're never going to bat 100. I'm just talking about the philosophy of it. That's all I'm talking about. I'm talking about the philosophy of it, the philosophy of culture, team building, the type of players you draft, the type of system you want to run. This is all philosophy. At the end of the day, you can't control if someone tears their ACL in game 6. You can't control whether, you get an unlucky bounce, an unlucky bounce, an unlucky bounce, and now you're down 0-3 to a team that you should be up 3-0 against. You can't control that. All you can control is giving yourself a shot. And I think that comes down to philosophy. I think that really comes down to your vision on how you see the game, in terms of how you see the league, in terms of how you build out rosters, in terms of like your sort of like team building philosophy, and in terms of like the culture that you're really setting. And I do think that I've been around, I don't want to say I've been around the NBA, but I think I've watched the NBA long enough to understand that some teams get it and some teams don't. And if you are fortunate enough to be a fan of one of those teams that consistently, over a 10-year stretch has shown you that they get it, like the San Antonio Spurs in, the early 2000s, teams like that, the Golden State Warriors, the Toronto Raptors. It's really like there haven't been that many teams that have enjoyed a 10-year run of success. I mean, you can say the Raptors missed the playoffs 2 times. Okay, fine. One time was a spectacular sort of like situation with COVID. And the other time it required a coach pretty much quitting on his team. But I do want to say this has been a model organization in the NBA for the last 10 years. Teams have looked to the Toronto Raptors and said, how are they doing what they're doing right now? That's impressive. We need to borrow from that. That being said, yes, you lost a lot of people. There's a lot of brain drain that has happened here. Absolutely. There's a lot of guys who technically contributed to this culture that are now, contributing to the culture of other teams. And then that's important, the reset. But the people who put those people in place are still here. For the most part, they're still here. You can make the argument that Brian Colangelo is not here and he put some people in place, and Tim Lowricke's not here, he put some people in place. But I think this team has shown, like this management team has shown an ability to, accurately discern what works and what doesn't, what type of people work and what type of people don't. And I just think like the philosophy is right. So whoever they bring in, I think it's going to be through a lot of deliberation, a lot of methodical, this is what we need, this is what we're trying to do here, this is, it's good to see. It's good to see. It might be frustrating as a fan to not know for an extended period of time what your team is going to do, but I think it's really good to see that this level of attention to detail. Like, I mean, look, every one of these interviews that's happening, it's not happening with an intern. It's Masai, Bobby, head management that is spending 6-7 hours interviewing these candidates. I think that's a good thing, isn't it? Isn't it a good thing? As opposed to just going with the first hire and thinking, well, if it doesn't work out, we'll fire him in like 2 years. I think the level of care that goes into the decisions the Raptors make is really like appreciate it, man. Like you gotta appreciate it. Like I just I hate to tie things back to myself because my life experience is just so minuscule compared to, running a NBA franchise. But I've always believed that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And so much of that transfers to the Raptors, right? When I think about like, when we do programming for the Pendants Film Festival, there's certain deliberations that take like days, whether it be this feature versus that feature, this short versus this short. There's just like a process that goes into it. And it's like, it's arduous. Sometimes it feels pointless to an onlooker looking on. They're just like, whatever, it's a 10-minute film. Yes, no, whatever, move on. And that laziness is what, quite frankly, all losing organizations have in common is they don't manage the details. They don't deliberate the finest points. When you talk to anyone inside the Raptors organization, you will understand that they will deliberate like a free agent or a draft pick like 30 times. It'll go back and forth like this guy, that guy, and then they'll examine all the points. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. That's the philosophy. That's the process. That is what creates winning. The results happen. Okay? The results happen. But you got to trust the process. I hate to say trust the process because I think Sam Hinkie ruined that for us. But that process did not work in Toronto for a really long time. Richard Petty meddling, player personnel, MLSE cutting costs. That's the process that wasn't working. This process does work. It had a bad result for a year. But I think you got to give the process time because this process is what's developed Fred VanVleet. This process is what has found gems in the draft. This process has turned into a championship, man. This process has increasingly had guys who like to stick around. This process has turned the Raptors from a laughing stock to one of the most respected organizations in the NBA. I think that has to be given its due credit that we don't become so washed in the moment of, oh my God, we got bounced in the play-in by the Chicago Bulls, that everything gets thrown out of the last 10 years. That's really when I talk about process, that's not my process. My process is not, I'm not tossing out 10 years of data in terms of what someone has shown me that they're capable of doing because they had a bad year. You see my point? Well, here's a question, James. Let me give you some perspective on this. The Toronto Raptors have used first round picks exceptionally well. Granted, you and I probably agree that they've tossed away a few too many for our liking. They've usually tossed them away for, win now moves at the deadline, whatever, right? There are a lot of players taken in the first round of the 2022 draft that I would not swap Christian Koloko for one right now. Just being honest. Yes, it's interesting to watch Nikola Jovic, a really big player from my country, and know that he probably would have been on the board. He definitely would have been on the board, or even Christian Brown, who I didn't like at the draft, but seeing him now, or Walker Kessler, yes. But honestly, apart from those guys, like really, Christian Koloko is one of the top 15 to 20 players, and I think he will be in that draft. So you got him at 33. Can we give credit there? I think that's fair, right? So you don't really get out of that draft. You kind of just move down. I'll also say this. The Golden State Warriors used the number 2 pick, the number 7 pick, and the number 14 pick. That's 3 lottery picks in order to, quote unquote, justify their tank. It was really a gift from God, right? They passed up on LaMelo Ball for James Wiseman. They passed up on Franz Wagner for Jonathan Kuminga. Think about that. Think about that. And that's one of the more respected front offices in the NBA. Now, you talk about the Raptors throwing away first round picks. Did the Golden State Warriors just kind of throw away a whole bunch of first round picks there? right? I mean, seriously, even like really well respected organizations are not very well respected organizations, but organizations that are in the good graces of fans right now have been tossing away first round picks in a way that the Raptors can't even fathom. I think the Raptors use their first round picks when they do use them. I think they capitalize on them. There is no one in the world. That's not true. No, actually, that's true. In the draft, if I had to do it, let's just say I did a GM draft. Like if I had a draft of like guys I want running my draft, Masai Ujiri is number one. Sam Presti's number two. Um, yeah, those two guys. RC Buford might be number three, but like not anymore. Um, yeah, like there's no other team where I'm like, yeah, consistently they always get it right. Who gets it right? Who always gets it right? Who's right? Like 90% of the time in the draft. I would take that. This would be a very interesting thing. Like if you had to draft, like who should run your draft? Like who would be the number one pick? I think Masai Ujiri would be the number one pick in the NBA. This right here, absolutely. Right. And what does that come down to? That comes down to process. It comes down to culture, philosophy, and process. You look at the Miami Heat, what are they known for? Heat culture, right? So when people come into your system, number one, you're finding the right people because you are the right people. It takes one to know one. You've heard that saying a million times, I'm sure, in your life. It takes one to know one. It takes one to know one. Yeah. Well, it takes a winner to know a winner. When if you're a loser, how are you supposed to spot a winner? And you wouldn't even know what question to ask, right? But it comes down to that, right? And then it comes down to setting consistent expectations. It comes down to managing egos. All of this is philosophically based. All of this, like putting Eric Spoelstra in a position to be a coach, hiring the guy in the first place, first of all, as a video coordinator, then promoting him to head coach, like not firing him because LeBron, decided to grace you with his presence in South Beach. All of this comes down to culture. You know, Mike Malone going to Serbia to get to know Nikola Jokic, building this really strong relationship with Jamal Murray at his most fragile moments, keeping Michael Porter, engaged, building a team around those guys that really makes sense to their strengths. That's really culture, isn't it? Everything there is culture. It's program building and culture. I think about it like from the perspective of just like any company that you build, there's culture of, culture is the most important thing in the world. And I really believe that. I believe it's more important than gender, sexuality, race. Culture dominates everything, everything, even religion. I grew up in New York. It's so evident when I meet people who didn't that there's a difference between how we communicate. That's culture. That's really what it is. It's just culture. And it's just, it doesn't matter how long I live here in Canada, it never quite washes away the initial culture. You know what I mean? Um, when I think about like any company that's successful out there, that culture is just, it's how you do things. Culture is how you do things, you know? Um, and I think the Raptors had like the right culture, and I think they just lost it. But I think all the ingredients are still there to refine it. And I think someone who comes in is just going to be a breath of fresh air. I'm just, we're in June right now. I can't wait for September. I really can't. I just can't wait to see this team open up in training camp. Scotty Barnes, all the vibes, everything that he's doing this offseason, just what that's going to look like coming into year 3 with so much to prove. Seeing this new draft pick, like I can't wait for Summer League, man. There's so much. I'm really optimistic about the Raptors in a way that I haven't been in. I can't say I was super, like, I was optimistic last year, but there was like some sense of like, how's this going to work? Fred at point, Scotty at point. Nick Nurse, Pascal Siakam, favoritism, et cetera, et cetera. There was like a seed of like feeling of like, oof, I don't know about that. Now, you have Jakob Pertl, big addition. You have this 13th pick, big addition. Really great draft. Like if there was ever a draft to like somehow like bottom out, I was hoping they would bottom out in this one, but 13th is not bad. It's not bad. So I think there's so much to look forward to as a Raptor fan. I really like, I'm not trying to do like some about turn where I do like a 180 and I go from like the most critical Raptor, podcaster on earth to like suddenly the most lenient. But I think that they're doing the right thing, man. Absolutely. Top 10 guarantees the player drafted has a great impact out the gate. 10 and after is a toss up. I disagree completely. Wow. Top 10 depends on the draft. There's so many drafts where like there's a fall off at 7, and yet there's so many drafts where there's so much value built by 15. I think that this draft has like serious value from 10 to 14. Like this range, like, let me put it this way: 1 and 2 in this draft is like exceptional. Like if I think about all drafts, it's like the 99th percentile of 1-2 picks, right? It's right up there. Like there have been very few drafts in NBA history, if there's even been one, where the number 1 and number 2 pick are this good. Okay. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to me is very average to below average. Brandon Miller, Emin Thompson, Zur Thompson, Justin Black, Anthony Black. Like to me, nah. Like this is pretty average. Where the draft refines itself is, I think, between 10 and 14. I think this 10 and 14 range is like 7 to 10 in most drafts, which is not saying a lot because there's a lot of bad players picked between 7 and 10 in a lot of drafts, but there is some available talent here for sure. Where was Kobe drafted at? 13th. Kobe Bryant was drafted 13th. A lot of great players have been drafted after the 10th pick for sure. Well, it would be funny if Kobe Buffkin is drafted 13th. That would be hilarious. Spider Mitchell was drafted 13th. I think there's a lot of players who have been drafted 13th, man. 13th, 12th, 11th, 14th. Like there have been a lot of good players drafted in that range. Klay Thompson comes to mind as well. So look, it happens. Michael Porter Jr., the guy you're watching right now, granted, due to back injuries, etc., not warranted. He was a 14th overall pick. There's just nobody else that I would rather have running this draft, man. You just know that they have scouted this draft so well. Like I can just tell. I can tell not only by the fact that they, number one, they traded out of next year's draft, so they clearly have scouted ahead, because they knew ahead of time that draft was going to be as shit as it was going to be. While other teams are like accumulating 2024 draft picks, not thinking about it, the Raptors actively trade out of the 2024 draft pick. I don't know, man. It's kind of interesting. Like you really, if you're a Raptor fan, like it's fair to be kind of confused about what this team is doing, because up until last year, like you have reports that they're dangling OG Anunoby for the 7th overall pick, which clearly signals rebuild, right? But then they go and trade a pick for Jakob Pertl, which totally signals the complete opposite way. So I completely understand where the reports are coming out of, like the Raptors don't know what the hell they're doing. They're totally confused. I get all of that. But at the same time, like I really do think that this process is going to make them stronger for it. So, anyways, that's sort of my take on this. I think the Raptors are going to be fine. I'm really looking forward to seeing who the coach that they hire. I have a feeling it's going to be Sergio Scariolo. I have a feeling I'm going to be okay with it. Wasn't my top choice, wasn't my second choice, but I'm cool with it. I'm kind of just happy to move on from the Nick Nurse era. I think, I think it's just gonna. I know I sound like a casual when I say it's just, change is good, but sometimes that's really what you need. You need a new voice. I think certain voices are just not designed to be long-term voices. There are certain personalities that wear thin, and there's certain personalities that don't. You look at a guy like Eric Spoelstra, who's been coaching there for over 10 years. He's fine. He's gonna keep doing it, right? But there are certain people, certain types of people that just, especially with the same group of people over and over again, I think they can wear thin. And I am just happy that, yes, I don't have any intel that Scotty Barnes didn't like Nick Nurse or anything like that, but it felt from listening to Nurse talk to him about him that there was clearly a bit of a disconnect in terms of how they viewed basketball. There was always a push pull, where Nurse is saying he needs to be more aggressive. Scotty's saying, I don't want to take their shots. I think philosophically, holistically, spiritually, I think Sergio Scariolo and his mindset is much more in line with Scotty Barnes than Nick Nurse's ever was. So that will be a very interesting thing to sort of observe play out if that is in fact how this breaks. Anyways, guys, Mel saying a new coach will be a breath of fresh air for these players. I fully agree. And look, situations change, people change, perceptions change. Look at how we're talking about Caleb Martin right now. Would any person in this world have traded Gary Trent Jr. for Caleb Martin last year this time? No, you wouldn't. You would want picks. You would want multiple picks as compensation. And now we're going to probably talk about Caleb Martin being worth like 2 Gary Trents. See what I mean? Like perceptions change very quickly. And largely it has to do with opportunity, role growth, etc. I think the Raptors have a lot of players that can pop. I think they draft really well. I think they've scouted these players really well. And I think the players who are in their program are in their program for a reason. I trust it. I trust the long-term vision. And I think the Raptors will be back in the playoffs regardless of whether they bring back Fred or not. I think they're play-in bound or playoff bound next year. I don't think they're going to be bad. And I'm just looking forward to watching it all unroll. And personally, I'm just looking forward to covering a Raptor team that is not going to be something that I have to shit on every single night. Because honestly, man, another year of what I had to do last year, and I say had to because I am unfortunately bound to telling the truth about what I'm seeing. I think it probably would have chopped years off my life, man, to be honest, because that shit was not fun. It was not fun at all. So I'm just happy. I'm looking forward to watching a better brand of basketball. It's really, at the end of the day, it's what it is. And it's not really like saying it's going to be a winning team or a losing team. I'm just looking forward to watching a better brand of basketball. Anyway, my lighting is changing because the morning light is coming up on me, and yeah, so. Really? You wouldn't? I think it's pretty close, man. To be honest, I think it's pretty close. But yeah, that's fair. I do trust Masai. The only thing that's worried me through this entire process is his relationship with Fred VanVleet. And granted, we all develop blinders for certain people, and that doesn't take anything away. I get it. No one's perfect. Clearly, he has a soft spot for Fred. He seems to value him. And, given the fact that they've hung up an entire offseason planning based on whether or not he wants to come back or not, I think regardless of how you feel about Fred VanVleet, he is still a hell of an asset, and you probably, all things equal, would prefer to have him back regardless of whether you want to move on from him long term or not. I think it still makes sense to retain the asset. I don't know if you're going to have the chance to retain the asset. So I fully understand where the Raptors are coming from in this situation, because you don't really get anything by letting him walk, right? It's not like you get free up cap space. And even if you did free up cap space, it's not like there's anyone in this free agent class that you could even conceivably use it on. I mean, most free agent rankings out there have Fred as the third best available guard in this year's free agency class behind James Harden and Kyrie Irving. Would you want James Harden or Kyrie Irving on this team? No. So Fred VanVleet's your top bet, and he is your guy, right? He's already in your system. He's the guy that you're supposed to be resigning. So granted, I don't think that 30 million makes sense, but if you can get him for 25 to 27 and then plan to move off of him very soon thereafter, or you can get him in a sign and trade, I think that's infinitely better than letting him walk for nothing, just from an asset management point of view, because certainly you can make a case that Fred VanVleet is worth more than Jakob Poeltl. Now, here's the funny part that you really have to just kind of admire when you consider like how badly they screwed this up. And I realize that most of this pod so far has been very complimentary of the Raptors, but I'll leave it on something sort of, somewhat critical. There was a ranking of all the free agents in terms of what they're worth, and Jakob Poeltl was 13th, and Fred VanVleet was 3rd, right? The San Antonio Spurs had an expiring contract in Jakob Poeltl. They managed to extract an Ken Birch wasn't an expiring contract. They managed to extract a first-round pick and 2 second-round picks, basically a loosely protected first-round pick, future pick in a bad draft, and 2 second-round picks. I don't think we were able to extract that value for Fred VanVleet. And that's shitty because you had the 3rd best free agent in this class. I mean, granted, here's another thing that's worth considering. Fred VanVleet played like shit up until the trade deadline. He didn't really turn around his season until like after the trade deadline, right? It was really after the trade deadline. It was like a month leading into the trade deadline and after. So really right now, if he had played the way that he did to start the season, like throughout the rest of the season, he's not the 3rd best freaking free agent. So in a lot of ways, his early start is not only what screwed up the Raptors, it's also what screwed up his trade value. So I think that's just sort of something that I thought that I just kind of worked through in my own head there in terms of why his value might have been a little bit lower at the trade deadline than maybe most of us would have expected it to be. Exactly. That's fair. Yeah. Anyway, guys, have a great day. Yeah. I hope that these lives can eventually take on a more substantial form. Like, I wish there's something to talk about, like, that's like more substantial than just shooting the shit, because I don't enjoy necessarily pontificating about nothing for like an hour and a half. But I don't know. Like, have I said anything in this podcast that I haven't already said 500 times already? I don't know. I hope I did. But yeah. Anyways. But I really hope that we have some news about the Raptors coaching situation in the next 2 days. That would be great. Predictions for Game 4. I think I should probably end it off on predictions for Game 4. Nuggets win. That's my prediction for game. I think it's going to break today or tomorrow. That's my estimate. That's my estimate. I think it's going to happen today or tomorrow. That would be interesting. Because it is. Wait, what am I talking about? Today's Friday. It was supposed to happen this week, so it could happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. So it's going to be today or Monday. I think it's going to happen today. I'm going to go to sleep for like 3 hours. I'm going to wake up and find out the Raptors have a new coach. Let's make it happen. All right. Anyways, guys, make sure to hit subscribe on your way out. And yeah, talk to you later. Peace. And I will see you after Game 4. We will do post game after that for sure. Peace.